Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Trinka and I'm ready to start this webinar on neuro glasses and concussion recovery. I suppose I should talk a little bit about myself because that's the order of events. There's my smiling face. And I've been a neuro-optometrist for approximately 7 or 8 years. I read a book that changed my life called, and this is a great book if you have concussions or know anybody that's had a concussion. It's called The Ghost in My Brain. And The Ghost in My Brain is about a professor of artificial intelligence at DePaul University in Chicago who got into a minor fender bender and it destroyed his life. He got a concussion out of it and it destroyed his life. And 8 years later, he ran into my mentor, Dr. Zielinski in Chicago, and she helped him with these neuro glasses. And I read that and I thought, there's so much I don't know about neurooptometry. I have to just study, study, study. And so I became a neurooptometrist and joined the group called Neuro, which is the Neurooptometric Rehabilitation Organization. So that's my story on neurooptometrist. I've been a certified nutritionist for about 20 years. I got that degree in 1999 and have studied with the top clinicians in the country, of which I think Dr. Stedman is one of them, and Dr. Maynard is as well. So I've studied nutrition, labs, physiology, how to help people with common problems that you can help with lifestyle, supplements, and diet. I'm also a syntonic optometrist. Syntonic optometry is a discipline, group of dedicated optometrists that figured out about 80 years ago that you can use light and color to balance parts of the nervous system. And I became a syntonic optometrist back in the early 2000s. And so I've been practicing for a while. And the more I practice optometry, or the more I learn about optometry, the more I think I need to know more. So I have a very humble approach to what I know and what I don't know, and I'm always learning. So that's me and my background. Let's talk about neuroglasses. So to get to neuroglasses, you have to have a neuro exam because you can't just pick them out of thin air. And there has to be a sequence and a reason for trying to make a pair of glasses that can rewire an injured brain and help with concussion recovery. And so I'm going to talk tonight. This is basically the whole talk right here is in this statement. That you can help people with concussions just by putting things in front of their eyes so that the circuitry is altered between a person's eye and their brain. So most people who have concussions are really familiar with this list. And you don't have to have a concussion to have some of these things, but most people with concussions have had experiences with a lot of this. Dizziness, headaches, balance problems, memory, language acquisition, can't find the right word, reading difficulties. I run into this all the time. Light sensitivities and kind of a lack of cognition. You don't think as clearly as you used to, and we call that brain fog, common kind of a colloquialism for that. I want to just mention something about reading difficulties. Most of the time, I see in reading difficulties three things, actually four things. Number one, people's eye movements and their ability to move their eyes from one place to another is altered. They are not very accurate compared to how they used to be before the concussion. So that's one thing I see in reading difficulties relative to a concussion. The second thing that I see is as a result of the concussion, very often, not all the time, but very often, I will see the two eyes altered so that one eye points high and one eye points low. That causes a lot of confusion in your brain when the inputs from your eyes are not on the same vertical plane. So we call that a vertical phoria, or a vertical tendency to have your eyes not be on the same vertical plane. Another thing I see is eye teaming. So you have an input into your brain from one eye, and then you have an input into your brain for the other. And the way the eyes work together as a team is critical in your ability to make sense of your world. And so oftentimes the sloshing around of the fragile brain inside the hard skull damages the circuitry associated with eye teaming, as well as eye tracking. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit. But I just wanted to make a point of it. And also, the damage from a concussion also affects a person's ability to focus. And focus is, I think I just lost my video, so let me see if I can put it back on. So evidently my video feed is not, there it is, there I am. So focusing is not something that happens at distance. So you don't, quote unquote, focus at a sign at a distance when you're driving a car. Focusing is only a near act. And so your ability to make the lens of your eye change so that it becomes a stronger instrument for looking at things up close is altered by concussions. That was one of the points that I really wanted to make. Okay, so let's continue. Hold on, I think I skipped a slide. Yeah, here it is. So this is a slide that's just dedicated to showing you that there's a boatload that happens from the eye to the brain. And when I first learned about how the eye and the brain worked in optometry school a long time ago, basically the only thing that they concentrated on was B, the thalamus, and the LGN, which is the lateral geniculate nucleus, or the LGB, lateral geniculate body. And this is the place where the first connection is between the eye and the brain. So there's neurons that go all the way from the retina to this structure, and then they connect with another set of neurons. And so this was about my entire knowledge base of how signals went from the eye to the brain. And this is what most optometrists think as well, is that it goes from the eye to the LGN, from the LGN through letter F at the bottom, these Myers loop, and then goes to the back of the brain where the visual cortex is, so that you have a picture so that you can navigate your world. But there's so many other things going on. And this is kind of the point of this whole webinar, is that the eye's connected to a lot of things. Connected to the superior colliculus, which is where the map of the visual world is. It's connected to the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which has to do with light and pupil responses, as does the olivary pretectal nuclei. Those are all things that have to do with making a pupil go big and small, depending on the light conditions. The retinal input to the brain also goes to the right amygdala, interestingly enough, not to the left. And the amygdala is part of the limbic system. The limbic system is a fancy way of saying, this is where your emotions are. And so eyes have an impact on emotions. That's pretty amazing, in my opinion. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, is right above the hypothalamus, and it has to do with light and dark and circadian rhythm. Many people who get concussions have a dickens of a time trying to sleep, and they sometimes don't have a real good feel for dark and light, night and day. And often it's because the connections from eyes to that are injured or damaged. Myers loop, I already talked about. That's the loop that sends information back to your um, occipital cortex, which is the visual cortex where you see images, and also from there back out to the brain. So let's talk a little bit more about circuitry. And there are, we call them geniculate for the lateral geniculate nucleus, LGN. And this is where your typical eyesight is if you're not thinking about all the rest of the things that the retina supplies the brain with. And there's two. There's the central fibers from a place in your retina called the macula, where as people can age in not a great fashion, they can get macular degeneration. Interestingly enough, I just read an article from an ophthalmologist whose position is that macular degeneration is related to eating refined oils like safflower oil, sunflower oil, canola oil. It's got a really fascinating the way he lays the whole thing out. Anyways, that was just a little sidebar on macula. Macula is central eyesight, and it goes from the retina to the lateral geniculate nucleus, as well as the peripheral eyesight off to the side. So this is what is kind of the domain of standard optometry. There's another circuitry from the retina to a little place in the midbrain, right at the top of the brainstem, called the colliculus. And there's the superior, and there's the inferior colliculus. And the superior and the inferior colliculus have to do with kind of where am I at, and how do I hear, and how can I localize sound. Another really important circuit is the circuit between the retina and the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a major player in all the chemistry of the body, including neurotransmitters and hormones and things like that. So super important there. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a sec. And then the final circuitry that, well, I mean, there's many more than this, but these are the important ones that I deal with in concussions. At the very base of your brain is a structure called the cerebellum. And the cerebellum is super important in guiding smooth movements and having to do with balance. So let's take a look at a couple of these circuits and talk a little bit more about them. So as I said, the retinogenic pathway is right from the retina to the first place it stops and connects with another neuron in the thalamus, which a little part of the thalamus is called the lateral geniculate nucleus. And there's two kinds of informational sources that come here from the retina. One of them is, where is what I'm looking at? This does not come from the central fibers from the macula. This comes from the peripheral fibers. So if you were to look at the retina as if it was a basketball cut in half, the very center of that point would be the macula. But all of the rest of the inside of that basketball would be considered to be the peripheral retina. And so the peripheral retina doesn't send signals about detail and color. It's mostly about size, speed, shape of the object, where is it, and it's like I said, its location. So unfortunately, this pathway is generally ignored in traditional optometry. You know, when we evaluate people's eyesight, we're talking about eyesight centrally, not peripherally, unless there's pathological damage. And then we have field machines to go ahead and assess where the damage is and how much it is. But that's structure, not function. Function is what we're interested in here. And the peripheral retina has the function of getting all these other details about what you're looking at, except color and the detail of the object that you're looking at. As you can see, it's a very fast pathway. I mean, this is lightning quick. That's a peripheral retinogenic pathway. So the next part that I want to talk about is the central retina, the what is it? So there's a where is it and a what is it? And they all go from the retina to the LGN and then onto the occipital cortex so that you can figure out where things are and what they are in your environment. This is a relatively slow pathway. And as it says here, and I said before, it's dedicated to color and detail. Super important, but in my opinion, rather overemphasized in traditional optometry. And it's not to say that this is not an important thing to do. You have to see, you have to be able to drive large tonnages of metal at high rates of speed, right? So you have to be able to see. But traditional optometry ignores everything else that I'm talking about. This is the only thing that it's really going to key in on, and that is sitting in a dark room, looking at a high contrast chart without moving and identifying letters. So it's dedicated to detail, and it's usually black and white detail. So let's take a look at the next slide. And this is kind of a cool slide. And what it's trying to say is that not only does the retinal signals send information that is relative to eyesight, but also it sends information to the chemical systems of your body and the neurological systems of the body. And all of that information goes to eye muscles so that you can move your eyes appropriately depending on the environment that you're in. And so if you just take the 1.2 million existing signals and cortical and go to eyesight, that's the domain of traditional optometry. Nothing else really matters because that's not what they're trying to do. That's not what they're interested in. And like I said, it's not a bad thing. It's just insufficient. It's incomplete. And I think if you're going to really take a look at how a person interfaces with their environment, which is completely affected by concussions, then you have to look at these other aspects of vision, because the first one is just eyesight. Eyesight's just, is there a clear image on the back of the eye, and is it being sent to the visual cortex so that you can see? Obviously, there's more going on, right? Obviously. Let's go to the next slide, and this is one of my favorite slides. And the reason why it's my favorite slide is because it shows how much you're not aware of when your eyes are open. And so this guy, Patrick Quaid, is the guy who came up with this. He works for the person that taught me this, Dr. Zielinski, and she gave me permission to use this slide. And so I really like it because it kind of says, hey, in a regular eye exam, you're gonna put your conscious attention on a letter or a series of letters. And your attention is very small. Your awareness that's conscious is on the whole chart, but your underneath your consciousness awareness is enormous. And this is what gets messed up in a concussion. Usually eyesight is not the biggest deal when it comes to concussions. It's the conscious awareness and subconscious awareness that really get affected. And the signals that come from your subconscious awareness and your conscious awareness are mismatched in your brain, which is what causes all of those symptoms of dizziness and balance and reading problems and light sensitivity and all of these things, visual motion sensitivity. which is a huge thing that is related to the peripheral vision pathway. And the peripheral vision pathway, as it goes through different structures to get to the visual cortex so that you can see, and then comes back out, it passes through a lobe of your brain called the parietal lobe. And the parietal lobe is what allows you to selectively ignore parts of your peripheral vision. You don't want to be concentrating on all of the sphere of your subconscious awareness all at once. It would drive you crazy. There would be too much detail. There'd be too much information. And so you have to have a way to turn on and off the central and the peripheral retina. Well, this is what really gets affected in a concussion, is your ability to ignore peripheral retinal information. And so you have people that they can't go to Home Depot on a or a Saturday morning and look for a bolt because it's just too busy. Or they can't go to the grocery. They hate grocery stores. I call it the grocery store syndrome. And they cannot handle it. It just throws them for a loop. They feel like they're down and out, wiped out for the whole day, just going to the grocery store. It's because they can't ignore peripheral retinal information. And this is one of my jobs as a neurooptometrist, is to try to balance the peripheral retina and its information with this, and about where the location is, the size, the speed, all the rest of the things that the previous slide showed, and the central retina, which talks about detail and color. So I hope you get something out of the slide. I think it's a great slide. Let's move on to the next one. So let's talk a little bit about another circuit called the retinal collicular circuit. And as I had mentioned before, there's two little bumps right up on the top of the brainstem in the midbrain, and they're called the colliculus. There's the superior and the inferior. And the superior is dedicated to mostly vision, and it has a map of the visual world actually kind of overlaid in the superior, in one of the layers of the superior colliculus. This gives you an idea of where you're at in space. The key point, and this gets damaged very easily in concussions. So this circuitry is a major player in helping people overcome symptoms if they've had a concussion. Most people don't even think about where they're at in space. The thought is it's like, yep, I'm in Colorado and I'm in Denver, I'm in my car. And it's much more than that. It has to do with gravity and this other weird word called proprioception, which is your ability to kind of figure out where you are at in space. Are you leaning left or right, forward or back? What's going on relative to your visual sphere of influence. And they call this the wear-or-not pathway because you have to accurately know where you're at in space to judge where other things are in space. And so one of the ways that I try to figure out in a neuro exam whether or not a person has an idea, if they have a clue about where they're at in space, is to put really flat lighting with no auditory cues and have them close their eyes and to turn 2 times to the right. And when they think they're in the same position as where they started, they open up their eyes. And then they do the same thing and turn 2 revolutions to the left. And when they think they're in the same position as they started, then they open up their eyes. And it's pretty amazing what I see. Anything from 10 degrees to 100 degrees to 180 degrees off. When a person is not close to being accurate in ending up at the same place they started, I'm pretty sure they don't have an idea of where they're at in space. Um, so that's one way that I find out if there's a problem with this. And if there's a problem with this, I know they don't judge distances accurately, because judging distances accurately is based on this. So that's a superior colliculus. And then there's another little bump right below it, and it's called the inferior colliculus. This has much to do with the auditory sense. And there's lots of projections from the inferior colliculus into the auditory cortex so that you can make sense of the auditory world. Just like as an eye doctor, I help people try to make sense of the visual world. And there's massive connections between the two. And so one of the jobs that I have is to try to hook up your eyes and ears, which brings us to the next slide. And so eye-ear imbalances happen a lot. And in fact, they're mostly present in children going to school for the first time. Really, the eye-ear connection is not very well developed until about age 7 or 8. And so, I mean, we have lots of kids going to school at 4, 5, and 6, and it can be difficult for them because they don't have this circuitry developed. And basically, it's, can you look at something and pay attention to auditory at the same time? Or can you pay attention to a conversation and not miss details as you're looking at something? These speak to, this scenario speaks to the connections between the superior and the inferior colliculus. Many people, I mean, and so how do I deal with this in my neuro exam? Well, one of the ways I deal with this in a neuro exam is to ring a bell and have people try and find it with their eyes closed. And so I know that if they're super accurate in finding the bell with their eyes closed, they generally probably have a pretty good eye-ear balance. So really important, not very much paid attention to in, actually even in neurooptometry, it's not that paid attention to. But the person who taught me a lot of this, she came up with this idea, and it's super powerful. Let's go to the next slide. Second to last circuit I want to talk about is the retina to the hypothalamus. And hypothalamus is amazing. There's so many things that happen here. So they call the pituitary gland the master hormone gland, but the pituitary gland gets all of its instructions from the hypothalamus. And so that's why I called it the master gland of all hormone production. And this is, thyroid hormones, pancreatic hormones, estrogens, progesterone, testosterone, sex hormones. All of these different things take information and from the hypothalamus to the pituitary and then out to the gland to go ahead and do what they're supposed to do. Also part of the hypothalamus is this whole regulation of day and night light cycles. And like I said before, many times I see massive sleep problems with people who have concussions. One of the very first, and honestly, if you have had a concussion and you don't sleep well, which you'd be in really good company, I call America the land of the chronically underslept, for good reason. It's a huge problem in America. But I just don't see how a person is going to recover from a concussion unless they can sleep, unless they can get restful sleep, where they feel better after sleeping, not wake up all groggy and tired like. And there's a lot. I mean, I am not a big drug person. I have a drug license for optometry, and so I understand pharmacokinetics and pharmacology and how drugs work. But it's really, really low on my list of things to try. And so I would, if a person can't sleep, and we've tried everything, including, things like melatonin and the herbs that can help calm a person down and magnesium. I will send them to their primary care physician to get a sleep aid. It's that important. So the hypothalamus is also um, associated with emotions. And there's connections from the hypothalamus into this system called the limbic system, where you process emotions. And so you can affect a person's emotional status by what you put in front of their eyes. You can affect how their hormones work by what you put in front of their eyes. You can affect how they perceive night and day by what you put in front of their eyes. And finally, there's a part of your nervous system called the autonomic. And the autonomic is made up of two parts. And one part has to do with activity. We call that the fight or flight. And another part has to do with more vegetative functions, like rest and sleeping and digestion. And theoretically, it's on a teeter-totter. And the teeter-totter is going to go back and forth. I'm being told here that my battery is low, so I'm going to go plug in my battery and be right back. Hold on just a sec. Okay, I am back. Looks like, yeah, battery's on. So in the autonomic nervous system, this teeter-totter between rest and digest and fight or flight, the final common pathway that regulates that goes right through the hypothalamus. And so if your hypothalamus, I guess the big point is that you can alter whether or not a person's in a fight or flight state or a rest and digest state just by what you put in front of their eyes. And very typically, as a result of a concussion, people are stuck in fight or flight. And so it's really gratifying to see that you can put things in front of their eyes, and we're going to get into what you can put in front of their eyes, to help bring a person out of this fight or flight state, which was, your body was never meant to be in that long term. Short term, sure, it's for survival functions. Long term, incredibly destructive. So let's go to the next slide. So the final circuit that I want to talk about is the one that goes from the retina through its various projections into the cerebellum. Cerebellum, as I said before, is an enormously important organ for, an enormously important part of your brain for balance and to have smooth and accurate movements. And so I see this quite a bit, is that the cerebellum is one of the primary things that gets injured in concussions, along with the parietal lobe. I think these two are probably, you might get some disagreement with other neurologists, but I see in my patient population, these are the two things that get injured the most. And so balance is a big one. And if you don't have good balance, for sure, it's involved with your eyes, your inner ear, and the cerebellum. To see, and this is a really common thing that all neurologists do, is they do something called a Romberg test. And the Romberg test says you take one foot and place it forward and then put another foot directly in front of it, heel to toe. And with your eyes open, do you sway a lot, or can you have a stable posture? Then the next step is for you to close your eyes. And do you still have a stable posture? Because your eyes are really important in your sense of balance. I mean, that's what part of this whole talk is about. And now you're just talking about your inner ear and your cerebellum. And so when you close your eyes and you take out that input, most people fall over if they've had a concussion. So if you do this on your own, do it in a corner of a room. So if you fall over, you won't hurt yourself and you won't hurt anything else. But it's a classic test that says, yeah, you probably have some balance problems. And so I can put things in front of your eyes and glasses to go ahead and improve the circuitry here so that you have better balance. The next slide, maybe I should have just put this up and said, this is what the talk is about. Now I'm done. I'm kidding. But it's true. The eye is connected to a boatload. There's so much going on that most people are not aware of that have a lot to do with how a person functions in terms of navigating their environment and making sense of the environment in front of them, which is why most people who have concussions have symptoms. Their sense of vision is not coordinated with the rest of their brain, so they have a hard time making sense of what they're seeing, and so they just they compensate or they adapt. Let's go to the next slide. So, not to get too involved in circuitry, but that's a lot of what this is about. I just want to talk just very briefly about the parts of the retina and how they hook up in very general terms to the parts of the brain. So you guys know that there's lobes of the brain. There's the frontal lobe, there's the occipital lobe, there's the parietal lobe, there's the temporal lobe, and there's a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. And so I can send signals to different parts of your retina that will send more signals to any part of the brain that I want to. And it's not as simple as saying, oh, you had a concussion and your temporal lobe is damaged, so we're going to send signals to the temporal lobe. Now, I wish it was that easy. Oftentimes, you have to send signals to the part of the brain that's trying to pick up the slack for the injured temporal lobe, or for the injured parietal lobe, or the injured right hemisphere, left hemisphere, or hypothalamus. So it's just really important, I think, for you to know that a good neurooptometrist can send signals to different parts of their brain, depending on what part of the brain they use to stimulate the retina through neuro glasses. Let's move on to the next slide. So, what makes neuro glasses special? Generally, four things, the four things that you see on the slide: prisms, lenses, colors, and occlusions. Let's talk a little bit about those. So, prisms. Now, most people are aware of prisms in color. And so you'll see a prism like a triangle, and light coming in from one side, and then you'll see the rainbow on the other side of the prism, made up of Roy Jabib, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And so that's not what these prisms are. These are not chromatic prisms for color. These are prisms that deviate light. This is one of the main tools that I have to help a person with a concussion and trying to make light go to a certain part of the retina to initiate more signals to that part of the brain. So it doesn't focus light, but it deviates light. And so as a triangle representation of a prism, there's a base and an apex. And so the key law is this: wherever the base is where you stimulate the retina. So if I have a pair of glasses that grinds in prism base down, so the base is at the bottom of the glasses, then I'm going to stimulate the inferior retina, and I'm going to send more signals to the temporal lobe. Well, why would I want to do that? Well, the temporal lobe has a lot going on. This is where you have language. This is where you reach for words when you're talking. This is where you have memory. These are really important things that I see that get altered when a person has a concussion. So there's two kinds of prisms. There's yoked and non-yoked. And yoked means that the base is in the same place. And so you can have prisms with the base at the bottom or at the top, over to the left or over to the right. And each one of those things can stimulate a part of the retina to send more signals to the part of the brain that you want to. And those are what are called yoked prisms. Non-yoked prisms do not have the base in the same location over each eye. And so these ones do not affect body position. If I put, for instance, if I put base down prisms in front of you, if they were large enough prisms, they would make your world seem like it was going uphill, and it would make you want to lean back. So many times I can affect hips and how the person's hips are just through prisms. When I want to affect the target location, I'm going to use non-yoked prisms. And so, for instance, remember in the beginning of this talk, I said that one of the things in reading difficulties that I see with concussion patients or concussing people is they have a vertical separation. And so I can use non-yoked prisms to make the eyes level. And so I'll do base up on one side and base down on the other, so that when people look through their eyes, a congruous signal is sent to their brain that says, hey, we know where horizontal plane is, not one up and one down. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the domain, the lenses are the domain of traditional optometry. You go into an eye doctor, they make the chart clear on the wall, and they give you glasses or contact lenses or recommend LASIK, right? And so we talked about this. This is just central retinal stuff, ignoring the peripheral retina. But it's a key player in trying to help people with concussions, because you can mute or expand the environment or the attention to a target based on what you do to the prescription after you find what makes the chart clear. For instance, if I add the tiniest bit of far-sighted power to a prescription, I'm going to emphasize the background, and I'm going to de-emphasize the target that you're looking at. If I add the tiniest little bit of nearsighted power, in addition to what makes the chart look clear, I'm going to emphasize the target and de-emphasize the background. There are different situations for which I might do either one of those things. I can also put more far-sighted power on one side, and if I do, I'm going to expand the space on that side or the other side. And I will do that often because a person doesn't have a good sense of where their body is in space, or they don't have a good sense of where their midline is, the line that will bisect the body into two equal parts. They don't have a good clue as to where that is. And so I can use lenses to help them be accurate in how they view space or their own body in space or their midline. So that's lenses. And again, I'm just scratching the surface on all of this stuff because this is only a 45-minute or so webinar. I can use also colors, and colors can emphasize or de-emphasize space. What I mean by that is red colors tend to expand a person's appreciation of space, and blue tends to bring space in. This is really important for people that I need to mute the environment because they have too much information coming in. So sometimes, as a result of my syntonic optometry background, I'll use very specific frequencies to either quiet down the sensory system or to activate the sensory system or the motor system. So you can, and the one of the objects of the game with colors is to balance the fight or flight and the rest and digest system, the so-called autonomic nervous system. So colors can be a huge player. Sometimes I never use them. Sometimes that's all I'm using. And it all depends on the person, which is really cool. I mean, you're going to personalize the treatment to the person, their symptoms, and what happened. And I think that that's the way doctoring should occur. There should not be a one size fits all. So let's move on to the next slide. Most often I see eye movements be messed up as a result of concussion. There's three kinds of conscious eye movements. There are more, but we're not going to get into them. These are the big ones. Fixations, which means can you hold your eyes at a certain place and just hold them there just to have a stable image on the retina? If you don't have a stable image on the retina, almost nothing else matters. If your eyes are moving around there, it creates so many mismatches between the visual world and what the rest of the brain is interpreting, is that it makes people very uncomfortable. So that's a fixation. A pursuit is your ability to track something. So if I take my pen and I go side to side and I'm following it as I move it from side to side, that's called a pursuit. And then the final eye movement is called a saccade, where I look at one place and then my eyes jump to the other without moving my head. So your eyes should be able to jump from one spot to another. This is what happens in reading, right? So reading is just a bunch of saccades. And the big saccade is at the end of one line and going to the beginning of the next line. But when you read, your eyes jump from one group of words or one word to the next, to the next, to the next. And so this is what gets messed up in a concussion. And there's things that you can do about it. So to do things about it, you have to measure it correctly. And to measure it correctly involves a machine that I have, an instrument that I have called a right eye. And this is a young lady that had a concussion, and she came in, and what this is her looking at a screen with a red dot that does different things. It'll go in a circle, it'll go back and forth horizontally, it'll go up and down, it'll jump from side to side, vertically and horizontally, and it gives you an idea of what's going on with these 4 infrared sensors in the screen that are looking at the eye movements while the person follows this red dot on the screen. And so this is not looking real good for this young lady. She's in the 28th percentile in tracking. She does a little bit better in jumping from one point accurately to the next point. And she does really actually pretty good with her ability to hold her gaze on one thing and be accurate at that. So here's the next part of why these numbers show up here. And so this is what it looks like. So in the top left here, you can see that in her left eye, she's pretty doggone accurate at following the ball in a circle. But what the heck happened to her right eye? Why is it shifted over there off to the side like that? And go over to the next panel to the right. Her left eye looks pretty good, but what's going on with that right eye where she doesn't even come close to the target on the far right, and she overshoots the one on the far left? And what's going on with vertical speed and targeting underneath that, where that right eye is all curved? So she obviously has some eye movement difficulties as a result of her concussion. So with this young lady, I did my neuro exam, and then I did I did a Sarah exam, and then I did my neuro exam, and I came up with a prescription that included lenses and prisms. And so what I did next was I had her redo the right eye, and look what happened. So now she's not in the 30s, she's in the high 50s. Look at her pursuits went all the way up to 44. and her saccades went up to 72, and her fixations are now at 94. Oh, I want to go back and show you her fixations from the last page. Look it up here in the far right, where the left eye, you see that blue cluster, and that means her eyes are dead on, right on what she's looking at. And there's no blue cluster on the right eye. She's not even looking at the target. And so that to me says you got a problem with fixations. So we go back here, and now everything seems great. These are the two parts of the brain that are affected in her concussion, which is very typical, the parietal lobe and the cerebellum. And look what happened with her eye movements. So instead of being canted off to the left in her circular tracking, now it's dead on. Look at the fixation stability all the way over to the right panel. Now all of a sudden her right eye is online, and that's directly looking at what she should be looking at. Remember the vertical speed and tracking, how that was curved on the right eye, and now it's nice and straight. So I was thrilled with this, and this is just a part of what a person needs. Sure, they need to make their eye movements correct, but they need to do brain-based activities, and they also need to make sure that there's not a metabolism issue as well for them to fully recover from their concussion. So my conclusion here is that neuro glasses are a key therapy in helping you recover from a hit to the head that causes a concussion and a traumatic brain injury. I'm happy to talk to anybody for a 30-minute free consult. You can call Dr. Stedman's office at Integrative Healthcare Denver, and this is the phone number to schedule a free 30-minute with me. And also, these are my resources. You can go onto my website, iBrain Connection, and 7 Steps to Health. You can get a phone number there and call me at my office up in Conifer. These are the two associations that I belong to that help me in helping people with concussions. And here's my final slide, and that is, this is what I believe, that your vision is associated with your brain, and your vision and your brain are associated with your life. And if you can change all of these in a positive manner, you're going to change your life, which is really what I'm after. I'm trying to help people live the best life that they can through their eyes. I want to thank everyone for being on the webinar, and I'll see you again in about a month. Take care.